Yeah. It's very nervous.
Let's go ahead and get started.
Have you ever done that years ago?
I'd like to call the meeting to order today for January's planning and zoning meeting, 2020, I think is the easier way to say it. So we'll get started, and just a reminder that this is a advisory board made up of volunteer citizens of Mexico Beach. If you have something before us today, you need to follow up and go to the council meeting next week. They make the final decision. We generally have a pretty close agreement on things, but certainly they vote the way they see fit, as we do. So, Jenny, would you go ahead and call the roll for us?
I sure will. Mr. Hogan?
Here.
Ms. Metcalf? Here. Mr. Kerrigan?
Here.
Mr. Driver?
Here.
Mr. Masters? Ms. Lindsay?
Here.
Mr. Bush?
Okay. Just said before, we're an advisory group, but the way we run these is we typically will open up for discussion from the public. Anybody has any input, then we'll close discussion. The board will talk about any questions or comments they have, and then we'll take a vote after that on the request before us. So let's start with the first variance request, 112 Miramar Drive, units A, B, C, and D. I'll go ahead and open it up for public hearing. Do we have anybody representing these properties here in the audience?
Yes,
Okay.
I'm Tony Huber with A3 Engineering Company. Actually, we're working on both of those projects, one's for the van, unfortunately.
Okay.
So we can answer any questions that you've got. I think you've got drawings, I've got larger drawings and things, if you can't see those, but.
Could you give us a short overview of what the request involves?
The units, there were four places or four units on each of the properties before the storm. And we're going back with 4 units, and they were all attached pre-storm, and that we're going back with attached units also. They're slightly longer, the plans are slightly longer than the previous buildings, and I think that was made it necessary to come ask for a variance for the 0 lot lines between the units.
Okay.
That's my understanding.
And can you define slightly longer, in which direction and how much for us? And whether it encroaches on the setbacks?
No, it does not. We're not encroaching on the setbacks, and it does meet the zoning requirements for, the overall size, impervious area. So we're good with all of that. It's just slightly different than it was previously. The new zoning, these lots have been rezoned since we started the project. And we made adjustments to meet the zoning requirements as they are now.
Okay.
Rezone now.
The previous land use map showed these as tourist commercial. So as tourist commercial, he wouldn't have needed to be here for a variance because it allows for attachments. But I think it was April we did it, is that right? When we did our land use map change? Or maybe it was February, I can't remember.
So tourist, commercial to.
Tourist commercial to high density residential. Yeah, there were about 6 properties that changed.
6 in that area or 6 total in the city?
They were all in that area, Miramar Drive, and then 1 or 2 on Canal Drive.
Okay. And the difference between tourist, commercial, and high-density residential?
High density residential has a 7.5-foot side setback, and tourist commercial has 0 if you have an attached easement. So that's why they're here, because they're not in their existing footprint. I think it's about 14 feet that they're extending depth-wise. So therefore they aren't grandfathered in, and so they can't have, because they're attached, they can't meet that side setback.
That was depth and not width,
Depth, that's right.
front to back.
Front to back, okay. Canal and Miramar Drive.
Well, this says that they do not encroach on front or rear setbacks.
They don't.
That's true. even with the increase in size, they still meet your requirements for the new zoning for that particular piece of property.
It seemed like, and maybe the next one, forgive me if I'm wrong, that one side is 6.5 feet. Was that 6.5 feet previously?
I'm not sure what you're.
Okay.
Yeah, the proposed ones are all 7.5 around the perimeter side.
Right.
So I know what you're saying, yeah, previously in the old buildings it was, that's right, it encroached, it was 6.25 or something.
Yeah,
like that.
yeah.
Yeah.
And now it's 7.5.
Okay, so
7.5 on both sides, 20 and 10.
20 and 10.
20 and 10, yeah.
Yeah.
So we've met all those requirements, it's just, we're leaving them attached.
The survey was a little confusing to me too. Are you considering, it said rear for both, there was 2 notes on the rear, both front and back. To me, the front is towards the street, is that correct?
Yes,
Where the 20 feet would be?
right, yes.
And the canal would be 10 feet?
Correct.
Okay. Anybody, any input? Nick, do you want to talk about, to us, about whether we've had any input, members of the board?
Yeah, I'd like to do that, but before I do, this is a question for everyone on staff. I just noticed that the title for this item is variance, we've been discussing variance, but the agenda abstract form refers to a minor replat. Is that an error, or is there intended to be something about a minor replat on this?
Oops,
Oh,
that's an error,
Okay,
that's my bad.
no problem. Okay.
So they're all going to be the original size they were before, width-wise?
Yeah. Width-wise, yes, that's.
Okay,
correct.
okay. All right.
In fact, it'd be a little bit, it's a little bit narrow, that 1 foot is.
Because you're
overall,
pushing
it'd be
it.
1 foot, yeah.
Okay.
So what the chairman was just referring to, I'm going to encourage all our boards to be a little more formal in these hearings now. We're getting kind of back to normal life, we're not rushing, everything's not an emergency anymore. So these hearings, this is a quasi-judicial hearing because it's for the variance. The way we start these, when the boards talk, is if anyone on board has had conversations, communications with folks in the public or the applicant, either positive or negative, for or against the project, we ask that you disclose just a brief summary of those conversations, who they were with, and just a very brief summary of what the substance was. And if you didn't have any, that's fine, just say no, I have not.
So has anybody had any conversations
Yeah.
with the public or any of the applicants? I have not either, so we're clear on that.
Very good.
Okay, no other comments? I'm going to close.
Can I ask a question real quick? I know I'm not a member of the board, but I did have a phone call
Oh,
from
that's
an
totally
adjacent. Do
fine.
I need to disclose that as well? Okay.
No, you're not voting tonight.
Okay.
So I'm going to close the public part of the hearing, open it up to the board for any comments or questions anybody has on the first request for a variance, which is 112 Miramar Drive, units A, B, C, and D.
My question, I guess, is to understand the request and why it's a variance, because it says that it meets the front and back setback, but it says unit A is requesting a 7.5-foot variance to the eastern side, setback only. Unit D is requesting a 7.5-foot variance to the western side.
This is that issue that keeps coming up where the way our rules are written right now, because it's outside the original footprint, then they have to meet the new guidelines. The new guidelines say 7.5 feet. It doesn't allow for a 0 lot line situation like that. So we're in the process of looking at that and getting that changed. So a lot of these that are coming before us won't happen in the future. We voted on at least 3 or 4 other ones like this where they butted up against each other, and they're not asking for to have 7.5 foot on the side go away. They're just asking to put it back the way it was and set 0 butting up against
It's
issue.
not growing on the side.
Not growing on the side, actually reducing on the side.
That's most of the story, but actually, we'd still be in this situation if brand new townhome proposed. the rules that they're offered, the way they're written, if somebody wants to build, let's just have a simple example. 2 townhome units on 2 parcels, they're gonna attach and sit right on the property line will be the boundary between the 2 townhouses. The way our rules are written, that is always coming to you and to the city council to approve as a variance, which is a strange way to do it, but that's what's been on the books for a long time. It's just we haven't been building any townhouses lately, but we are rebuilding the townhomes that were destroyed. So if they've rebuilt the exact same footprint, we basically created an exception right now so they can go do that. But when they're expanding the footprint a little bit, it falls back into that old procedure of, well, you could probably do it, but you have to come get permission first.
Thanks for that clarification. Okay. Anybody on the board have any other comments or questions? Okay. Do we have a motion?
I'll make a motion to approve the variance.
Second.
Okay, we have a second. Jenny, would you call the roll when you're ready?
Mr. Hogan?
Yes.
Ms. Metcalf?
Yes.
Mr. Kerrigan?
Yes.
Mr. Driver?
Yes.
Ms. Lindsay? Yes.
Okay. Approved, and we'll get the council meeting next week. Okay, next group is 114 Miramar Drive, units A, B, C, and D. Going to go ahead and open the public part of the meeting, and let's start with the question, has anybody on the board had any contact with the applicants or the public in this regard, in regard to 114 Miramar Drive?
No.
I have not either, so. Okay, same representative?
Same presentation, same exact situation again.
Okay,
And we're, 7.5, setbacks are all the same on all 4 sides. Is the other part.
okay.
0 lot lines in between the buildings, the 4 buildings that are there.
No encroachments into the setbacks? Okay.
We're good on all those sides. Our overall coverage is less than.
Just a curiosity, but when are they planning to start building?
We're in design phase now. We're actually designing pilings and foundation now. The house plan is being finalized now also, so as soon as possible.
Are these modular or?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so they'll be stacked modulars then? Okay, good. Okay. Gina, I didn't give you a chance to talk on the first one much. Are you okay with
Yes,
representing the building department?
yes.
Okay, great.
The project is less than the required impervious surface,
Yes. We,
does not exceed the,
The buildings
Buildings.
themselves, yes.
okay.
We don't know about driveways and all that
Just 50% for them. Okay. All right, any other comments from the public? Okay, I'm gonna close the public part of the hearing. Do we have any questions from the board or any comments? More the same kind?
Yep.
Okay. I'll close the board part of the meeting, and do we have a motion?
Motion to approve.
Second.
Mr. Hogan?
Yes.
Ms. Metcalf?
Yes.
Mr. Kerrigan?
Yes.
Mr. Driver?
Yes.
Ms. Lindsay?
Yes.
Thank you. Just a point of information, do you have a party wall agreement in place for the new portion?
there was an existing prior to, yes, sir, there's on the old building. It's the same owners, same agreements with the
Okay, that's great. We're encouraging that people have that, not requiring, but encouraging. And I think here's a representation of the fact that there was one in place, and 4 people have gotten together and they're rebuilding and going, where we've got a lot of people in town that are struggling with neighbors and stuff, and they can't get everybody together, so
We've been involved in some of those too.
I congratulate you owners that have that party agreement in place. Spread the word that we're in favor of party agreements. As you talk to everybody else.
Sure did.
You're a great example of that. Okay, you're welcome to stay, but you're welcome to go. No hard feelings here.
I did have one question.
Okay,
On the other 4 that you said you voted on,
the other.
they all passed?
Yes,
unanimous?
No,
No, but they were passed.
yes,
Okay, thank you.
by us and the council.
Did you add council?
Yeah. Okay. Mario, city administrator, temporary city administrator, which we certainly appreciate. We're glad to have you.
Thank you. I appreciate being here, and I appreciate everything that's been accomplished and all the extra work that you're having to go through because of some of the things that have happened in the past. Again, most of these type lots were done back in the 80s, and I don't know what your land development code and comp plan and all those things had. And digging that far back into the past would go back to my college days, and I probably don't want to do that.
Well, they've been updated,
Yeah,
thankfully, so.
and thankfully so, but again, because we're building things today that were inconsistent with what was done in the past, the council and yourselves had the foresight to put together an ordinance that allows us to rebuild in the existing footprint. So in essence, all that you're doing is building at the same density that you had back in 1980, 81, 82, 83, when a lot of these townhomes were built. And the proposal that legal counsel and a zoning consultant, or a land planner consultant has come up with is to leave the density just the way that it is. In other words, allow that to be the grandfathered component, and you've already done that to one degree, but to make a minor modification to the comp plan that memorializes that, and then open up a zoning category that is actually called townhomes. And once you have a zoning category that's called townhomes, that only works on these grandfathered lots, so the two are tied together by the grandfathered lots. We're not adding townhomes all over the place. This is only working within that existing envelope. It makes it where the setbacks are no longer a problem for every single one. You wouldn't have.
Party wall setbacks you're talking about.
Correct. That, you would actually then have a zero lot line where the party walls already exist.
On the sides.
On the sides. It doesn't change the front and back, which is 20 feet and 10 feet or whatever they are, in different locations, but your side setbacks all become zero, which would make it where you wouldn't have had to have read the first A, B, C, D.
And when you're saying side, you're not including the real sides.
Correct. If there's.
Still 7.5,
Yeah,
7.5.
if you're at the very end where you're abutting regular residential at 7 feet, and where you're abutting commercial, where you're abutting a different category, then you have to go to the 7 feet.
7.5.
Or 7.5, but when you're going to zero lot line, the zero lot line, which is what was built, that's all you have to do is maintain that zero lot line. So it's fairly simple to do. We create a zoning category and make it that way. I say it's fairly simple to do. I've only introduced the idea here. It has not been put on your agenda. So if I get enough head nods that it
That makes
sounds like a
sense.
good idea, what I would propose is we'll have Laura put together the language, and Nick will put it in an ordinance fashion and bring it back to you for your next meeting in February to have hopefully your approval of the general principle. Once y'all would approve it, then the city council would approve it in their first meeting in February. It would then go to the state level where they have a 30-day review, and then it would come back and we would probably read it for the second time in either the first meeting in March or the second meeting in March, and then from that point forward, we would not have to do variance after variance after variance for any of the parcels that are already existing with this level of density, because again, with this level of density, we're not adding more density. We are literally grandfathering in the density that was put together at this time frame. So Mexico Beach will not have more. It will have the status quo on quantity, but allow the zero lot line to be the zero lot line as what has been practiced in the past.
Just in a comment, and I think that sounds like some direction we need to head. I would ask her to also incorporate that into the chart that we made for each category, so it's clear what the pervious, non-pervious, height, everything else, all that's incorporated in, so it's clear when you look at the comp plan and the LDR.
And
where we
within
are.
that, I'm glad you mentioned pervious and impervious, because again, in a regular high-density residential, it's 8 units to the acre. With 8 units to the acre of 50% impervious, is not that hard to do. You've got a lot of acreage and only 8 buildings. In this particular scenario, you've got, according to a study that was done back in January 10th of 2019, Aurora did a study that shows there are some places that are all the way up to 25 units to the acre. Once you get to 25 units to the acre, it is impossible to do a 50% impervious area. It might be closer to 75%, it might be closer to 80%. I need it to be flexible enough right now for Laura to provide that input to say that it needs to be 75 or 80 or whatever percentage it is, so that we can remain consistent with what was actually built in the past, or make it better, which is the next category, which is, we're going to talk a little bit about pavers.
I guess, and I want everybody's input on this, not just me, but just thinking out loud, the concern I would have with the ones, if we do have some that are 25 per acre or whatever, and they don't meet the impervious situation, I'd almost rather, I guess we're kind of defeating the purpose, but I'd like to get a look at those and see why they're that high, and improve them one by one rather than just do a blanket. You can go up to 25 per acre, or if you were 25 acre before, you can do 25 now.
We're not increasing the density. That's why I said, if you had 25, you're going back with 25. If you had 18, we're going back with 18. We're not increasing the number of units.
Right, but we are going over what our high-density residential,
Joel,
at 8 per acre is.
you already had that. And that's why I'm saying, that was grandfathered in. When, in the 1980s, when this was built, you flat out did not have 8 units
So,
of the acre.
so just take, for example, for discussion purposes, this situation we just approved. If that was.
This situation's better than what I'm talking about.
Okay, right. So
Here's-
in that situation, would it meet the new criteria?
Probably not. Again, when I look at his plan for impervious, if this is concrete over here on the front,
I would assume stone, but I think it shows stone, but.
I don't have my magnifying glass.
Yeah, look at the next one, the next one's bigger. I guess irrespective, we've been struggling to try to work on those pervious and impervious numbers, and I hate to just wave the wand and give up the 50% for high-density residential. Because, for example, if we gave them an 85% number, they could have pavers or not pavers, and that's gonna affect the number. So I guess I would be in favor of looking at that, to see where we are on the pavers and the pervious and impervious, because that's all included in the calculation. Unless you're just talking about building square footage regarding pervious and impervious.
Okay, I believe the interpretation of pervious that is permitted is pervious is permitted as a total.
It is.
Building
yeah,
and,
yes.
and sidewalk and
Yes.
or driveway and or pavers and or
Right.
auxiliary building. Everything cannot go over the 50%.
Right.
And I'll venture to say that 99% of what's out there goes over the 50%. Within
Within
the
townhomes, you're saying?
within the townhome use. Again, imagine 1 acre, and imagine putting 25 units on it
Yeah.
that are all 1,000 square feet. I mean, if they were just 1,000 square feet, you're already talking about 25,000 square.
Versus 43,000
Yeah.
square feet for an acre, 43,560,
Yeah.
whatever.
And that's just a 1,000 square foot, and there aren't too many 1,000 square foot buildings out here, or footprints, I should say, because that's it. Total square footage is typically stacked. What I'd like, again, Alora did an exercise back in January.
I don't think we've seen that. We see.
And
No,
again, I saw.
I'm
it for the
disappointed
first-
we haven't seen that. If it was done.
Way
Like
prior.
December of 19?
Yeah,
Okay, so.
yeah,
it's
that
just
was 19,
being-
so it was a long time ago.
Yeah.
And as soon as I saw it, I thought it had merit to be brought up here, because if what you have is 8 units to the acre, and what we currently have in existence is 25 units to the acre, the two just will never match.
Right.
And because the two will never match, the impervious will never match. And you can in essence do this for every single one of those if you so choose, which in turn causes a hardship for the
Yeah.
builder at $300 per variance, and the time for you, and the time for staff, and the time for council.
Most
If-
importantly is we want to move it along and get these
Certainly.
houses built, so.
And again, if we can do something that is good and consistent and does not increase the density, does not make the impervious area worse than it was before, I'm trying to make us
Yeah.
better, but to literally get back to a 50% impervious and to literally get back to 8 units to the acre, we just can't get there anymore. And
On townhomes in certain
on
areas.
townhomes in those certain areas. And again, this is going to be extremely specific to these townhomes in these areas that are existing conditions. We're not opening up Pandora's box to have more than 8 units to the acre. If it does not exist today, it will not exist in the future.
So here's where I kind of feel pushed. If they went back on the existing floor plate footprint, that's fine. If it's a situation like this where they want to expand it, then to me, you're kind of double dipping. You're taking the original, we can build it back where we are, and you're allowing them to hurt the impervious ratio even more by increasing it. So that to me is difficult, I guess. But I'm in favor of having it move along quickly, less variances, for sure, so.
On this particular application, we'll see what the eventual proposal is, but it says pervious surface in the driveway area, so that's why I was asking staff, is the building less than the 50% ratio, which I've been careful to ask that every time on all these approvals, and so far the answer's been yes. We just think soon we're gonna get some where the answer's no.
Yeah.
But it's helpful to review what we've already done before we start looking at so many issues that maybe some of them we've already handled. The density primarily has really been handled. We've already got codes on the books since February that basically say you can have back the same number of units you had as existed the day before Hurricane Michael. It gets confusing when you start saying, well, it's 20 units a acre, 25 units a acre. It sounds like you're gonna give somebody more rights than what they already have, but what we've already done is said, if you had 1 unit before, if you have a small lot, you can have 1 unit after. If you have 2 units before, you can have 2, even if that might actually equate to some
Yeah.
high number, 20 units per acre.
Yeah.
So the way that's set up, nobody's gonna come in and go build 20 units to the acre in some area where it wasn't already like that. What it really is it allows someone to rebuild the same unit they had before. So
Does it allow, let me just stop you there,
Yeah.
then. Does it allow, in a case like this, to expand the unit?
So that rule that I just discussed is only about the number of units. It's not about the size of the units, the setbacks, or the impervious surface. It's just how many units can you have. Then you also have to deal with setbacks, which live only in land development code, they're not in the comp plan. And then impervious surface, which is in both. It's in the comp plan and it's in the land development code. So Mario mentioned we're gonna probably go through a state review. The primary reason for that is we think we've gotta do something about impervious surface to deal with the reality that some of these townhomes are not gonna meet 50%. And that 50% threshold is in the comp plan right now. And if we change the wording of the comp plan, it goes through a state review as well as just a city review. And what we're thinking about would be most effective is instead of saying for all of these high-density residential townhome areas, instead of saying they all have to be 50%, we're thinking we're gonna say there have to be 50% except for these townhome areas that we've created a new zoning category for, and that impervious surface will be set just in the land development code. We'll take it out of the comp plan, set it in land development code so that we can adjust it a little more easily if it turns out that we don't quite get it right, because we're not exactly sure what is all gonna be applied for until we've seen more of it. So far, we're not getting ones that exceed 50%. We think we will. We don't know if we're gonna get a lot of them. We don't know if they're gonna be 80, 90%, or if they're gonna be mostly around 75%. So it's hard to predict exactly what we need to address all the situations. That's why it'd be good to just deal with this more with the land development code instead of having this strict across the board 50% level in the contract.
And I think it's great that we're looking ahead at this to get out in front of something like this. You know, that's really helpful for us and helpful for the people that want to build their houses back to not be held up on something like that. Does anybody else have any comments on this? I've been talking too much on this.
Well, one thing that bothers me is I'd like to have time to look at this, because, you know, I was unaware of this study being done, and so.
And this is just information at this point, there's no vote here. You won't vote on anything until the next meeting, and we'll get it before you with
So
good time.
you would get this information to us with the,
Yes.
because
So we can-
I really, you know, feel like
Mhm.
we need to study it a little more.
Certainly, and that's why I just wanted it for discussion for this meeting, so that I could bring you all up to speed at the same time, and to call one person, then to call another person, so on and so on. Just, you lose translation between one and the other, and having it in a public meeting where everybody can hear the same thing.
It's great.
Is beneficial, and then for the following meeting, we'll actually bring you something that is actual language that's being done by a planner, and you'll have it in the normal time frame so that you can study it before.
Well, and I think it's important, you know, we have this other issue to deal with in terms of pavers, and I really hope that we can kind of look at this with some innovative ideas about how we're gonna define these things and how we're going to implement this type of process, because I think we could do some things as part of this, and I think it needs to be a whole package. So.
These two things at the end of the day are truly
Yep.
married together. There's no way to do
Yes,
one
they
without
are.
the other.
Yeah.
And tonight, the whole purpose is to get your reactions to things before we go and draft something and get it so formally down the road, because we didn't know. You might say, no, I don't want these townhouses to be rebuilt, period, leave the rules alone, or you might say, we don't care about impervious surface, go to 100%. And that's the kind of feedback we want before we start drafting something.
Yes, we care about the impervious
I was
surface.
gonna say, I
think
think
you
we
heard that loud
can
and
go on
clear.
record as saying we care about impervious surface.
I don't think New York City, with its cement, is really what we want, especially not here at the beach. I have a question. Will this be influenced at all by the end of our 3-year grandfather?
For building back in the same footprint.
Well, that's a lot of, obviously, some of that will change. Will any of this that we're discussing tonight, will it go with, will it negate? Does it have anything to do with? Should we be looking at the end of the 3 years? I mean, we're in our 2nd year. I'm just thinking, you know,
It is somewhat related. That rule about you can build back in your footprint is really directed at setbacks. But certainly if building back the same footprint means you might exceed impervious surface, they need to be looked at together. Really at this point, if you're building back in the same footprint, it's gonna put you at 60, 70, 80% impervious surface. It could be approved anyways, because it still has to fit under the comp plan requirements, but I
Right.
don't think we've been seeing those. What that rule has been doing and streamlining is people who violate setbacks are able to rebuild the same footprint.
Just wondering.
But at times they're gonna overlap.
because we'll be there before you know it.
We will.
Yeah.
There's one approach to this is to create rules that make that more permanent. Another approach is to don't do that and make people deal with the setbacks and do it correctly.
I think that we just don't want to end up with more of a mess than we had to begin with.
Right. So we look forward to your
Thank you.
work. And Jenny, can you make copies or
I will.
just
I can
email
make,
us that?
actually, I have a machine right behind the door there, so before y'all leave, I can make y'all all copy.
That's great. Great.
So how do
Okay.
pavers come into
Well, that was the
My
next thing on the
next
agenda,
question.
so we kinda already jumped into that one.
You kinda did, yeah.
You, Mara, you wanna sort of fill us in on what you gave us on the sheets?
Yes, well, I did
That's
not.
from Mr. Bush.
I did not produce
Okay.
this, so what I would like to give you is something that Nick produced, it's already in our
Thank you.
code. That already addresses impervious surfaces, right? So we literally already have something there, and typically, as a designer, you would go to a paper manufacturer, and they're gonna have a cut sheet, and it's gonna tell you its permeability, and there are details on how to maintain that level of permeability. And if you have a paver that is an open paver that's designed to have grass in it, that has a permeability, but if instead of,
Bless you.
instead of putting grass in there, if you put clay in there, it's gonna make it impervious. So I mean, keep in mind, it's just like a cake. If you put the wrong ingredients, it's gonna turn out like a rock, and if you put the right ingredients, it's gonna be fluffy. These pavers, if you follow the right directions, are gonna provide permeability that is gonna be beneficial to the community as a whole. There is some component to maintenance, but again, that almost depends more on what gravel you put in there in the first place. If you put a real fine gravel in there day one, it's gonna be less permeable day one. But if you put a larger gravel that doesn't have, that has, you know, airspace between things, it's gonna be more permeable. A paver that is literally paver to paver, that are locked pavers, that only has a little couple grains of sand in between, I will tell you is probably as close to impervious as you can get. But there are pavers that are made with a pervious concrete, that is an open cell concrete that does allow things to go through. If there are lots of clays in the environment, if we were in Georgia, where there's orange clay everywhere, I will tell you that those pavers become silted in by that clay fairly quickly. Our predominant soil here is beach sand, and unless you're bringing in clay, you're not gonna get a whole lot of that. I'm not telling you that it's gonna be as good as it was day one, but 3 or 4 years down the road, it's gonna be less, but it's still better than absolutely nothing. And one of the things that we have today is we have quite a few places that are out there that are asphalt and concrete. And if they're scared to change from asphalt and concrete to a paver, because as soon as they change, they have to meet, I'd hate to chastise someone from taking their asphalt up or concrete up and put a paver system up that becomes 40, 50, 60, 70% pervious. So if at all possible, please consider the same grandfathering that we did with the buildings, that you've got a ton of people that have concrete driveways out there, and they don't particularly have to tear them up and haul them off. They can choose to leave them all broken up and maintain that 100% impervious area. So again, this allows for the paver manufacturer to provide the cut sheet that says it's 40, 50, 60%, and I would hope that you would consider what we already have in the code as something that, again, is better than nothing. I've put down a 100% gravel driveway in Panama City, and I had to argue with the planner at the time that said, well, that's 50% impervious because it's a rock. Well, I argued with them because drain fields are gravel, and the reason that the drain field is gravel is it lets water go through it quicker. And you can drive up and down 98 going into Walton County, and you'll notice that they have gravel strips because it lets the water go into the ground quicker. It's a means for getting water off the surface and into the ground quicker. So if you can get a paver that has an open cell, and there are plenty of pavers out there that have an open cell that then have gravel below them, I think that's actually a pretty good system because it takes the water off the surface into the ground and starts to get it down below. But again, just like that cake, if you put a layer of clay underneath that paver, it is 100% impervious because clay under pressure with compaction, you can make a swimming pool out of it. So if we allow the specifications to rule, and allow the developer to come in, which is looking after the best interest of their homeowner, I think there's merit to allowing pervious pavers to be introduced into the community, because it is better than, again, the status quo, which is places where there's driveway after driveway, where if they tear it up, they can't go back with anything, because they're hitting that impervious area already with building already. So it's either that, or we're gonna end up with nothing more than just gravel everywhere. That has its problems, because it unravels the edges of the roads without a concrete strip.
Do you know, we know that Gulf has just changed to making pavers impervious. Do you know what Bay County's, or Panama City or Panama City Beach, what they say about pavers?
I'm pretty sure that Panama City Beach follows this. I can't tell you about the others. I just don't have the knowledge. I can find out.
That'd be great. I called a couple counties and I didn't hear back from them, but I didn't call them until today, so I apologize for that. But I did hear back from Gulf County, and I got the regulations from them and what they show. And they used to be 50% pavers, or impervious or impervious, whichever way you want to look at it. They
And
allowed
I think it's
50%.
very hard to say 50% or 70% or 30%, because unless you know what the paver is and what they're putting in between the paver and what they're putting underneath the paver, I can tell you, I can make a 100% pervious paver 100% impervious by putting the right base underneath it. And I can take an open cell paver and put a really dense grass like zoysia, which grows with a root mass that's like this, it'll suck up the water, but it's not gonna let it go through. So again, there's just so much to making a good cake. And I know that it's hard for, this group can't control the cake as much, but the cut sheet can tell you what it's supposed to be, and at that point you gotta, hopefully the developer's building what they're telling you that they're putting in, which is this paver with this kind of rock underneath it produces X percentage of permeability.
Okay. And evidently, I thought this was from you, that Jim Bush did this for us. Okay. And just for those of you in the audience, I know you probably haven't seen one, we can pass one down to you, but it basically just talks about pros and cons of pavers. I'll just read you the conclusion. It goes through what Gulf County suggests, permeable, porous, pervious pavers, talks about those. Jim's thought is, conclusion, the city should treat all pavers as impervious and amend the LDR to reflect that pavers cannot be used as a substitute paving material for new construction. And Jim's, I think, all along been pretty strong on that, so there's an opinion also.
Can we get a copy of that?
Sure. Lisa, comment?
As you know, I've done extensive research on this and looked at it from a number of different aspects. And I see three major issues that need to be considered. One is installation, one is maintenance, and one is the current state of our water table and flooding that we have right now after the storm. It's going to be difficult to know who is installing these pavers correctly, because anybody can tell you anything and then go install whatever they want to. So there's an issue in checking the installation, because as Mario said, it must be installed properly in order to be effective as far as pervious surface goes. So installation is going to be a problem, and checking the correctness of that. Maintenance is going to be a problem, because my research shows that if these pervious surfaces are not cleaned in there's specific ways, once a year, within 2 to 3 years max, they become impervious. And while we do have beach sand instead of clay, that sand can clog a lot of these pavers. So how is the city going to make sure that every property owner who installs these is maintaining them properly? Is the city going to go out and inspect them? Is the city going to require a service contract? How is that going to be handled? Because if the property owners do not maintain these, you're going to create another impervious surface. So that's a problem. And the third thing is, since the storm, with most of our trees gone, we have a flooding problem. I don't know if y'all, but we have it in my neighborhood. But the trees are not there to suck up the water table. When we have high rain events, the water table is full, the water stands on the ground because there's no place for it to go, and there are no trees to suck it up. And we're not gonna plant back the forests of pine trees that we had. Those sucked up 200 gallons a day, each tree. And so we have a 20 to 30 year flooding issue because it's going to take 20 to 30 years to get our mature trees back in here. That's if we start planting trees now. We're already over a year into this, nobody's planting trees. So we have an ongoing flooding issue for the next 30 years. So if we allow more surfaces to be covered with impervious material, and those surfaces are not maintained, that adds to the flooding issue. So I think these things have to be discussed in great detail and very carefully, because while it's nice to think that we can have impervious surfaces, and we can, you've got questions of who's gonna maintain them and how are we gonna check. So I think the discussion has to be ongoing at this point. I don't think it's something that we can just think about a couple of times and just make a quick decision on.
Okay, thanks for the comments. Gina, I'm gonna ask you if you have any comments representing the building department, any input from our citizens on pavers and what you're hearing on the street.
I guess from the building department's perspective, we just need clear direction. Really, there's a lot of a lot of talk on the streets and what's allowed and what's not. And it's changed with each city manager, city administrator changing. The stance on the language that's in the LDR is interpreted differently, that's currently in the LDR. We've gotten different guidance depending on who's sitting in the chair. So it would be nice to have a clear, concise, here's how it's done.
Okay. Consistency.
And from my stance, it's gonna be according to what's written, which is what's documented.
My comment would be, I know how important installation is in this process. And I understand the issue with maintenance, but there's no way that we can police that. There's just no way. We can't police people taking care of their property to any degree in any way. I wonder if we could, however, include some guidelines in terms of what happens if there is construction, that we make sure that it's not underlain by, at least require some information in the plans that say, we've got sand underneath these pavers and not clay and things like that. I mean, that seems like the only approach that we could possibly take that would be doable. I'm concerned about it, and it's a big issue for me, but I can't see that we could monitor maintenance in any way. And I hate to just say no pavers, but can we add something to the construction installation plans that say, yeah, if you're gonna put in pavers, they need to be done this way? And again, we may not be able to keep everybody out, but at least we could make the public aware that you know, because people don't think about this. They don't think about whether or not the builder is putting clay under their pavers. They don't understand the whole concept of stormwater. So if we could do something from the building standpoint, you know, that would be maybe some guidance for the public, so that they're aware of this issue.
Gina, when you build now, the building department has to sign off on certain phases of your construction, is that right?
Correct.
What are those, if you can rattle them off?
Well, there's foundation inspection, there's your early electrical, plumbing, mechanical, framing, you know, and then it keeps going,
Yeah.
until you get to final building. But, and then at final building, there's another inspection where it's called an LDR inspection, where we check setbacks, building height, impervious area to make sure it was done per the plans. But there is no inspection for
Currently. And that's-
currently, but we could have a paver inspection.
And that's what I'm wondering.
Yeah.
I don't think anyone would argue that it's a problem right now. Mexico Beach, it's only apparent now that it was a fairly forested little seaside village we live in here prior. When you look and you see all the trees that are gone now, that's, to Lisa's point, not gonna happen anytime soon. So maybe this is an important step of,
And
I
again,
realize it'd be another layer of inspection, but
That's
to
okay.
your point, why put down papers if you have solid surface under?
and it is an opportunity for some public education with people. If we can put something through that they realize that the building department is going to check on that and say, now, wait a minute, you know, if you're gonna put pavers in, that's fine, but this is the way it has to be done. So that we are, you know, still moving ahead and informing our public of why we're doing this, not just, you know, we're up here making a bunch of rules that everybody hates, you know, that's not productive. But if we can build this somehow into the concept of a public education and the awareness part of it, I think it makes sense.
And if the bigger problem is tree and plant loss, I think that should be addressed equally. I know there's some requirement for
Seven
how
trees,
many,
7 trees?
but,
One tree per 50 feet
Oh.
of property line.
but given the magnitude of the problem, just proper installation of pavers probably won't get us there. And
What's-
maybe that needs to be changed, more trees, I would be open to understanding that from a landscape architect's approach, that says if you do this, this will happen in the absorption rate.
Is the city taking on the responsibility of replanting trees? Aside from,
It's,
Aside
on
from-
city-owned property.
Well, of course.
But outside
Of course.
of that.
well, no, I wouldn't expect that. I mean, on city-owned property.
We do have, I could probably reach out to some resources
Just
that would
wondering.
donate some trees, and have some things, you know, like, again, I would wanna wait till springtime or a
Of
good
course.
time to plant, and
Just-
maybe, we can reach out to some organizations that can bring in some saplings and things like that.
Let me say this, in the spring, we planted, or in the summer, we planted 68 trees in 7th Street under the palms.
That's good.
There
I
are
didn't
other
know that.
groups, yeah, and there's more, you know, because, Extension Service and other people have given away free trees, and many of those have been put in these other areas. The other thing that, and I have given to the building department information about, Florida has a program called Florida Friendly Landscaping. I've discussed this with you. There are so many resources out there available, but we need to have that public education to let people know that these resources are there and that these things are available. And, you know, that's not what we have done in the past. So,
Do
public
we-
education is an
Apparently not.
important,
I had no idea, and I've lived in the city
exactly.
since
We-
96.
And I'll tell you this, the extension office in St. Joe, which is close enough for us to get to, is now starting a program where they're gonna have that office staffed on Saturdays for people to come in and get that kind of information. But, you know, are we promoting that? No, we're just sitting here.
Gina, do we enforce that step as strictly as the foundation and the electrical and the plumbing? I mean, do we go and say, you don't have enough trees to get your CO, or you get a CO?
I thought we
Yes,
did.
You cannot get a development order without the proper number of trees.
And you can't get a CO without having those trees planted.
And of course, that's great, and Gina, since she's been there, is doing a fabulous job with all of this. But here's something else to consider. That's for new construction.
Yeah.
All of the houses
Lost
that
our trees.
were left or have been repaired, and all of their trees gone. My house was repaired. I lost 20 trees. I've got to get at least 20 trees back. All of those are not falling under any of the land development regulations, y'all. They don't have to plant trees.
That's right.
So
That's
we
true.
really need to look at some way to force every property owner to put trees back.
Well, maybe with the education as suggested and the knowledge that, you know, it is your responsibility to replenish your property, force maybe might be a little bit rough.
Force may be a little rough,
But
I know,
to
but
replenish your property, then, you know, I think that with a little bit of education, perhaps, we as landowners, if we know we have to do that, with spring coming, I, for one, will certainly take a big look at the trees that I've lost and the replanting.
and there are things that people can do in planting the trees to help the city by not planting a deep-rooted tree over the utility lines that run in your yard, because that used to be a big problem here. People would plant trees right over the water and sewer lines, and the roots would puncture the lines, and then you got a problem there. People covered up, the outlets, and everything, because they thought they were unsightly by planting trees over. So there's a lot of education in where to plant these trees, and if you properly plant trees, you create windbreaks to knock the wind off of your house. I
Well-
think that would be something that people ought to understand.
Well,
You know,
let me
There's a
just,
lot to it.
Go ahead. There is a lot to it. But here's the other part of it. Forcing people to plant trees is a shortened end game, okay? Because if you plant a tree, you have to take care of a tree. So you force people to plant trees, and I'll say this, my neighbor, he planted the 7 trees or whatever, however many he was supposed to plant, and every dadgum one of them died, okay? So this is not just, okay, go out there and stick 7 trees in the ground, or however many trees it is. And so, for that reason, as well as the rest of this, I think that what we ought to be doing is to support the concept of public education, making people aware. There are so many resources within our community for getting this information, and we're just not promoting it. I don't think. So
well,
that's all
I
I'm
think
gonna
all good comments, and I think we're all in agreement, certainly, that more trees would be great. And I think also, though, we're all in agreement that we've got a lot of standing buildings that we're having trouble even getting those
Still have-
knocked down and whatever. So, not that we don't need the trees, but I think there's other priorities that we should also address in that regard. And I know Mario and the team is working with Gina on that, but it's all a package to me. When you get it all done, then we're back to where we want to be. One more comment, and then
Yeah,
we'll get off
listen, I
trees.
see it's been overlooked. You're talking about residential development tonight and housing, the commercial establishments. I did design work on the leader for drainage from commercial areas. I don't see that anywhere addressed. You know, to make sure that the storm drains will not be able to handle the runoff of the parking areas associated with
There's-
commercial development.
There's calculations and there's discussion in the comp plan and the LDR about retention ponds, and if it's greater than X
Yeah,
number of
well,
square
I'm gonna
feet.
go with that, and I'll be frank with you, I don't think our storm drainage system here would match any standard I've seen.
Well, it's something we can't change immediately, but just so you know, there are regulations regarding commercial buildings, retention of water, runoff, and things like that. We made sure that was in the comp plan and the LDRs when we did it. So whether it's exactly right or to the highest standard, we do have standards.
It's also addressed very strictly under state law, and that's part of the complication when you hear about some of the available commercial parcels in the city are hard to build on, because they're being required to also build a pond, and the parcel's so small that by the time there's a pond and a building, nowhere to park, it doesn't all fit. So there's no way really to get around that state law unless someone just kind of does it in the middle of the night when nobody is watching it. And we do have requirements on commercial stormwater. So kind of to wrap up the conversation on pavers and driveways, I think that adding one more inspection to ensure that things are being done appropriately is a recommendation. And the reason why I want to make sure is that's a perfectly good option. I think that that's going to lead though to one more fee to the building department. It's going to raise everybody's cost a little bit, which might be a good trade-off. But I just want everyone to understand that if that's the recommendation of the city council, it comes with probably a cost as well.
Well, I think you need to decide whether pervious or impervious or permeable or whatever, so you know what you're inspecting. If you're allowing interlocked pavers, for lack of a better word, then those need to be in the calculation or not in the calculation. I think we need to get that figured out so we know what we're inspecting. If someone pulls up a concrete driveway and then puts back pavers, even if you count those as impervious, that's a wash, but I still think they should be inspected like we're talking about, so we get the most bang for the buck, that people have spent the money to make their house look better or whatever. The city would be great to get the benefit of having the permeable water go through those, so I don't want to add any more work to the group, building group, but I think it's, we inspect hurricane straps and impact windows and roofs and whatever. I don't know why we wouldn't want to put pavers in there and have
It's
them.
an impervious,
There's a cost when we have all this stormwater, because then we have to spend a lot of money taking care of our stormwater problem. So there's always gonna be cost associated with it. The question is, where do you want the cost to go? Do you want it to go up front so that we're prepared and we're able to maintain our infrastructure? Or do you want it at the back end where we sit here and go, how the blue blazes are we gonna bring this stuff up to code?
how many more
So-
mosquito trucks do we have to
Exactly.
hire?
Yeah, I'm
I'm
not
sorry,
saying it's a bad idea, but it probably will lead to increasing the permit fee to the property owner to cover the cost. That's the likely.
But that's a
It is
user
attached to
fee.
it.
That's a user fee.
Yeah.
That person is
Yeah.
putting in that, creating that stormwater, so they ought to pay the price.
Just a quick clarification. If a structure now, if it's grandfathered in, is beyond the impervious calculation, and they choose to bust up that concrete driveway, can they put another brand-new concrete driveway there?
It's one of those that, it's a catch-22.
I brought that up with
Yeah.
Gina a couple months ago, that was something we're gonna run into. We haven't yet, but
Yeah, and inadvertently, what you can end up with is everybody here is gonna wanna say, I'm just never gonna replace my concrete driveway, because as soon as I have to replace my concrete driveway, I can't, because I've created impervious. They already had impervious.
right.
So
No,
it
if
is
a
a
house was
catch.
destroyed though, if they're substantially damaged beyond 50%, they're required to meet codes, so they wouldn't be able to just keep their concrete driveway, rebuild their house and see impervious here. So it's a little different for the completely destroyed house versus the guy who has a busted up driveway who's deciding what to do with it.
So just to carry your thought a little bit further, if you've got this circumstance, they build back on the same pad, same slab, their driveway survived.
Or
So-
may not survive during the construction process.
Right, so now, they don't meet the new regulations, but they didn't change anything. They just left everything the same.
They should have to tear out the driveway and put in something that counts as impervious. if they were over the pervious surface levels now. I don't know what's going on, but really.
That's rough.
Yeah, that's a tough one.
And I would like to clarify one other thing. A pervious paver versus concrete versus sand versus gravel is not gonna fix a flooding problem. If your water table is at this level,
It's gonna be.
you can have ball bearings and the water's not gonna flow through it.
Right.
I mean, the bottom line is,
Yeah,
all of these systems only work when you're above the water table.
right.
When you're in the water table, I hate to say it, but there is no magic fix for you're in the water table. And I wholeheartedly agree, a plant does help the water table. A plant helps the water table all day long. And it's not just the trees, it's the bushes, it's the shrubs, it's the grass. Anything that is out there taking photosynthesis and creating oxygen is processing that water to do that. So anything that you have in your yard that is green in general is gonna help absorb moisture that's in the ground. Moisture that's in the ground on the north side of town is more important than moisture that's in the ground on the south side of the highway. South side of the highway has beach sand. Over here, you tend to have more of the silts and the organics because it's an old marsh.
And to that very end, we contract with experts like Laura to tell us where we can place concrete and what type and how much and density of it. Maybe we need to also get the input of a person that understands the plant environment.
Good idea.
Good thought. Okay, good discussion, we're happy to have it, and if there's a quick answer, we already would have done it, so gives all of us some food for thought. Any miscellaneous? Anybody else have anything?
I have one.
Okay.
This is Regina. She'll know the person I'm probably talking about, but I have a question. I've been asked this by more than one. People can now bring in a RV, if their lot was damaged, if their home was damaged.
No, if they're rebuilding.
They're rebuilding.
If they purchased a lot since the storm, and they're planning to build, but they can't get anyone to build right now, Builder won't call them back, they will put you on a list to talk to 18 months from now.
Right.
Can they not do the same thing?
I think they would have to pull a permit to show that they're that far
Don't they have
along
a
to
time
do it.
limit? They have a time limit on that?
I don't believe so, but there might be.
I thought there was.
A time
I
limit
thought there
on
was a
it?
time
What,
limit.
Gina?
Is there a time?
There's a
limit?
1 year,
About 18.
it's 1 year, you get a sticker.
Yeah, you do get a sticker.
You're supposed to get a new sticker at the end of the year when we got that in
Yeah,
place.
but as far as like a time limit on when we're gonna quit giving stickers, I don't know. Cause I know people have gotten another sticker at this point.
Is there a charge for those stickers?
I believe it's $15.
Just
I
like
do
you used to
think
get
there
for
is,
golf
I think
cart?
there's a time limit in the ordinance for the, I wanna say it's 36 months, don't hold me to it though.
Yeah, it's either 2 years or 3
Either
years.
24 or 36 months.
And then
The stickers?
Yeah.
well, how long they'll be
How long they'll be
available.
Oh, the
permitted
permit.
to pull.
Yeah,
an
Yeah,
RV.
and then there's a certain amount of time for how long you're supposed to have the camper on your property, but I know that staff has repeatedly said, as long as we can see they're trying, that they're not going to be very strict.
It seems like we just put them in the same situation as somebody who already had a piece of property, who can't get something built.
Yeah.
Until you pay the money, pull your permit, and show the progress, you're all in the same line. And so they just jump right into the head of the line for that matter to get the stuff done. And I think that will be a challenge when the day comes when we have to start pulling out trailers. And I think I would encourage everybody to talk to anybody they know that, and Gina, help me on this, April 2022 is the deadline for going back on existing footprint. So we need to talk that up because it takes a while to get a permit, it takes a while to get plans done, it takes a while to
It's a lot
get
of
it
buildings.
built.
It's a lot of
It's coming
buildings to
quick.
build.
So yes, it can be extended by the board, but if you've got somebody that's got a lot that under the new regulations can't be built on, if they don't get cranking soon, then we'll be in a tough situation. So talk to everybody and tell them. find out, call the city, what are the rules, when? We don't want anybody to suddenly have a lot that they can't build on, that they could have built on a month ago before the regulation.
That 2022 date's not to complete construction, right? That's
Correct.
To
To get the permit,
Get started.
so you actually got 6 months past that. You can redo the permit and then go again, but, yeah, it's coming quicker than we know. Okay, I'm done talking. Close the meeting. Do we have a motion?
Have a motion to adjourn?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thanks for coming again.
You gonna make this copies for us, Dennis and Nate?
I- I was,